Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome to the Paisley Book Festival. My name is Daniel Hahn, and I'm delighted to be here at the Paisley Book Festival, which is now in its third year. As you will have gathered, last year was a digital-only festival, which was a great success for the Paisley Book Festival. And so they're running this year as a hybrid, with some events taking place live in Paisley, others streaming digitally on the YouTube channel. I should also tell you that if you can't go to the live events, films from some of those live events are going to be uploaded to the channel in the days afterwards. All the digital content is free to access, so I hope you'll watch some other events as well as this one. This year, the festival is asking authors and audiences to reflect on the transformational power of stories in our lives, how they shape and reshape our identities and offer us support through difficult times. To have this conversation today, I'm delighted to be joined by these two amazing writers who are incredibly engaged, who are political, who are original, stylists and thinkers. Both of them have won countless prizes in their respective home countries of Chile and Brazil, but also internationally. And it's a great pleasure to have them with us, Diamela Eltit and Julián Fuks. We have a slightly strange, I have a stack of books that we're going to be talking about today. It's a funny mixture because, I'll explain this to you briefly. We have Diamela's brilliant novel, Jamás se fue o nunca. We have Julián's brilliant novel, A Ocupação. Both of these books have been translated into English. I'm very proud to have been able to translate them. So they're also translated now into English, as Never Did the Fire and Occupation. There is a book that I have written about translating Diamela's book. I hope you're following this. It gets complicated. And we have Diamela's book translated by Julián. I do about 100 public events a year, and this is easily the most incestuous event I have ever taken part in. But it's lovely to have two writers who know each other's work as well as being able to talk about their own. Welcome, both of you, to this conversation. It's such a pleasure to have you. I want to start by asking you both about for people who don't know you and don't know your work, I want to go back to the beginning of your careers and ask you about, even before you wrote or published your first book, whether you feel like being a writer was inevitable somehow. Julián, let me ask you first. Do you think, looking back at pre-novel writing, Julián, was it only a matter of time? Were you always somehow going to end up being a writer?
Well, first of all, hello to everyone there. I'm delighted to be here as well. I'm very proud of myself for being here because not only, I admire a lot both of your works, Diamela and Dani's, but I feel I've connected you both by recommending Diamela to Charco Press, and this is a reason to be very proud to see what's happening here and to see that many people will read her book, which is amazing. This amazing novel, Never Did the Fire. So I'm very proud of myself for being here too. What I can answer to your question, unexpected question, is that no, it's never inevitable to write anything or to become a writer. I feel it's not inevitable right now. Even when I finish a book at this point, I'm not really sure that I will be able to write the next one, that the next one is inevitable. So before writing anything, it didn't seem quite likely that I would. It didn't seem possible to write anything. It's always for me writing a sort of negotiating with impossibility. I feel I wouldn't be able to do it. Every time I feel this, and my first books talk about that. I write about that in my first books. I didn't know what to write about and how to write anything at that point. So it's not at all any sort of confidence of feeling of fate that I had to do or of a mission. It's not at all like that. I see myself every now and then thinking, what else could I do with my life? What if I became a psychoanalyst? Maybe I would be happier like that. So I'm still thinking of it. And I'm 40 years old. Maybe it's not possible anymore to change that much. But and I believe I will continue writing. But even then, I think this is never inevitable and never obvious to continue.
Is there an impulse which is always there, even if you don't know whether you can achieve it or realize it or complete it or make something perfect? Is the impulse the same to start a book like it was a decade ago?
I think it's not the same, but there's definitely some sort of impulse there, because there's a kind of a necessity that I don't know where it comes from, that I get more and more dissatisfied with myself if I don't write. So if after 1 month or 2 months without writing anything, I tend to be unhappy in a very different way. So it's something that drives me to writing, and that maybe this is a kind of necessity that I could mention in that place if I would talk about a necessity.
Diamela, when Julián talks about he used the word necessity to write. When you started to write, did you feel that same? Did it feel like that?
Mira, la verdad es que yo siempre estuve, digamos, muy cercana a la cuestión literaria porque fui una lectora desde siempre, ya desde la infancia. Eso fue extraordinario, encontrar un espacio, ¿no? Un determinado espacio que fue extraordinario realmente, habitarlo desde siempre. Entonces no tuve, digamos, sorpresa en seguir ese camino. Leí mi primera novela más o menos a los 10 años, sin saber, por supuesto, que era una novela, ni saber nada del autor. Leí Por quién dobla las campanas, ni de la guerra civil, etcétera, ¿no? De Hemingway. Pero ese fue un momento donde encontré un espacio mucho más amplio, ¿no? Un espacio para viajar sin viajar, para ver los dilemas del humano sin necesariamente vivirlos, para ampliar el imaginario. La entrada en la literatura me permitió salir de una vida, de la vida común que llevan los niños, los adolescentes, y tal vez cuando terminé mi primera novela de leerla, recuerdo que pensé, quiero ser escritora, ¿no? Y después se me olvidó que quería ser escritora, por supuesto, y tuve tal vez la mala idea o la buena idea o la excelente idea de estudiar literatura. Pero al estudiar literatura me di cuenta escribir literatura era algo bastante complejo, ¿no? Que tenía que ver con el lenguaje, con la historia, con la histeria, en fin, con una serie de circunstancias. Y por lo tanto, que no tenía nada que ver con experiencias, digamos, estrictamente personales, y si son personales, se entienden como sociales. Entonces, tuve dificultades para aproximarme a la primera novela. Me demoré 7 años en escribirla, en parte porque el estudiar literatura y ponerme precisamente en el dilema de la lengua castellana, primero castellana, hoy día española, me hizo ver, digamos, la tensión contenida precisamente en la historia y en la letra. Pero tal como dice Julián, aprovecho de saludar, por supuesto, a Julián, saludarte a ti, querido Daniel, se me olvidó la parte protocolar, y por supuesto a Jess y a Carolina. Después, tal como lo dice Julián, nada de lo que he escrito me sirve para el libro siguiente, ¿no? Siempre escribo el libro siguiente como si fuera el primer libro, ¿no? Tampoco Julián se siente más liberado si no está escribiendo. Yo lo dejo en pausa, ¿no? Lo dejo que fluya, que el tiempo fluya, porque tiene que llegar algo. Es como una cita, para mí es una cita. Tengo que esperar que llegue y pues empiezo a escribir sin un proyecto previo. Me siento, digamos, primero fue en la máquina eléctrica, no, en la máquina común, después la máquina eléctrica, después la computadora, y espero que se manifieste, digamos, el texto y termino, digamos, entendiendo lo que estoy haciendo, y una vez que lo entiendo, dejo que transcurra. No controlo la escritura, dejo que fluya y que se curse, ¿no? Pero eso, no, sé que esa es una forma que hasta ahora he tenido, dejar que se curse, que surge, que se curse. Pero eso no garantiza que pueda terminar un libro. Yo soy muy, reviso una y otra vez. He estado escribiendo hace meses un libro del cual llevo más o menos 14 páginas, ¿no? Por meses de meses, porque sencillamente todavía el tema del libro no me ha dejado, ¿no? Me tiene que dejar, tiene que irse y cursarse por sí mismo. Pero no me siento, también en eso coincido, yo no me siento una escritora en el sentido de una carrera o de una meta a la que tengo que llegar, ¿no? Sencillamente escribir, yo pienso sí que es un privilegio, porque el mundo no está pensado para que uno escriba libros. Es una cosa, y escribí sin pensar en beneficio, ¿no? Tenía que ver con romper la rutina, con hacer un hoyo en las rutinas pensadas para la vida común, hacer un hoyo en la rutina, y en ese sentido sí siento que es un privilegio, ¿no? Porque la vida en general, en eso tal vez tengo una diferencia con Julián, me parece demasiado burocrática, donde uno tiene que trabajar, tiene que hacer o por lo menos, yo tenía que trabajar, tenía que cumplir funciones, y sé que después termina el ciclo, y lo interesante es que ese ciclo ha sido interrumpido por la escritura, donde yo me pierdo de mí, ¿no? Y eso es interesante, cuando tú sales de ti y dejas que la escritura cope el espacio.
It's so interesting, Julián. Diamela was just talking about, she talked about waiting for a book, about that process of, you sit down at your typewriter, electric typewriter, whatever it is, and wait for something to come, and you don't plan, and if it flows, it flows. And I wonder whether you have that experience after finishing something, Julián, if you get to the end of something, and then is there a moment of, I now have to sit and breathe and look out of the window and just wait? I mean, that's slightly frightening, I imagine.
I think for me, it's maybe similar to that, because I really am not able to write anything after I wrote something. So I need time between one thing and another. And this time, maybe it's simply waiting, but I believe I'm doing more than that. That the thoughts are coming, and that I'm elaborating whatever it will become, and I'm not sure if it will. I'm never certain that this next book deserves to be written. That's something that a sort of uncertainty that habitates me, and it's impossible to go away. I'm this kind of insecurity that becomes part of the book, and that the book asks itself at some point. It's something that maybe it could be considered something that comes from outside. So it comes from the window. It comes from somewhere else. but I believe it comes much more from inside, that something is at work. It's at work before you start writing it. And I have a lot of trouble in starting. So this first page, first sentence that you have to write of a book, for me, it's something that frightens me a lot. It's not easy to get there, to get at that point, and definitely differently from what Diamela said, it's not something that flows. She says she doesn't want any kind of control, and I'm a controlling kind of writer. I tend to control. I try to control almost everything that comes, words, uh, noises, rhythm. Everything must be thought at some point. And sometimes when things get a little freer, if I can say that, if we get to some new kind of liberty in writing and spontaneity, and then it becomes something else. And there's the moment where I feel some pleasure in writing. But many or most of the time is not pleasure, and it's not something that I would feel as natural at all. It's hard work and self-doubt.
I'm thinking about. I've been translating a great Brazilian writer Machado de Assis the last few weeks, and I was translating a story this week called "The Canon," and it's about somebody writing a sermon. It's a brilliant, brilliant story, and it's just about. It's set inside his brain, and it's about a noun and an adjective searching for each other. And it takes 7 or 8 pages for this noun and adjective to find each other because they are destined to be together. But it's such a struggle, and to find this perfect match. And I keep thinking about that experience of a writer trying to find that thing. Um, I'm curious for both of you. I suppose this is a question about process, really. Um, this idea of getting to something that is refined and is exact. Diamela talked about working the same, I think you said 14 pages. Um, can you describe a little bit that process of going from, starting with something which is maybe comes very quickly to going again and again and making small refinements? Because both of you, I mean, I think your styles are very different, but both of you have so much precision in what you were doing with language. Can you say something, Diamela, about that, finding that precision in your language?
Bueno, a mí me interesa muchísimo que la escritura genere imágenes, ¿no? Pienso que es extraordinario que genere imágenes y que sea el lector el que las actúe, ¿no? en su imaginario, ¿no? Cada cual lee con su imaginario y las pone en escena de acuerdo al imaginario que cada uno tiene. Eso lo veo también siempre he pensado, me fue importante leer Artaud, el escritor francés, pensando en el teatro. Él habló del teatro de la crueldad, pero yo pienso en el teatro de la letra, ¿no? Veo también la letra y su teatralidad. Entonces me interesa muchísimo, y en eso me detengo, en teatralizar esa letra, sacarla de su comodidad, de la comodidad de las imágenes, para generar otras uniones, otras imágenes, ¿no? Eso, desde luego, bueno, lo que he escrito a lo largo de todos estos años, que ya no es más de un siglo, son 1000 años, verdaderamente sé que es algo, digamos, las estructuras a las que apelo o a la que apela la escritura en la que me refugio, no es centrista, ¿no? Es más bien lateral, pero ahí tengo puesto, digamos, mi propio imaginario, ¿no? En ese momento donde de la sorpresa que te puede causar el construir una imagen que no habías pensado, nunca, y que sencillamente aparece y tiene que ver casi con una performance, ocupando términos más actuales, de la escritura, ¿no? Eso me interesa mucho. Sigo pensando central para la literatura su escritura, ¿no? Pienso que sin escritura no hay literatura. A lo mejor es una definición muy arbitraria, pero corro el riesgo porque en definitiva puede haber muy buenos, y de hecho hay muy buenos argumentos, pero si la escritura no lo sostiene, se desfonda, se cae a un vacío. Entonces me interesa esa escritura como sede. Si para eso tienes que estar en los bordes, con las imágenes y con el recorrido de esa escritura, pues yo no tengo problema y sigo pensando eso, cómo sacarle letra a la letra. Ese es mi desvelo, cómo sacarle letra a la letra, ¿no? Eso es lo que me apasiona, me interesa, me sigue interesando. Ahora, desde luego, he escrito, bueno, varias novelas, algunas de ellas tienen partes más fallidas, otras me han sorprendido. Y si me han sorprendido, vale la pena, aunque sean 20 páginas, de haber escrito toda la novela, ¿no? Porque ha sido un encuentro sorpresivo, con imágenes y una densidad que yo misma no había previsto. Entonces, sí, mi tema primordial es la escritura, ¿no? Y cómo llegar a esa escritura, cómo llegar, ¿no? A veces no he llegado y he dejado textos sin terminar porque sencillamente no fue posible, no pudieron desprenderse de mí misma, no se fueron y para mí tienen que irse.
I'm interested, Diamela, when you talk about writing things so that the reader does work and the reader makes the images in their imagination. I'm comparing that with the way Julián talked about control. And I think there's something that is almost the opposite of control when you're talking about that. There's something about your writing, Diamela. There is so much. There is ambiguity. There is disorientation. There is doubt. There are all these things that make the reader engage very much, but also it's about letting go of some control in the writing.
Yo pienso que, efectivamente el control que yo efectivamente entiendo muy bien a Julián y su necesidad de control de la escritura, de controlar su texto, ¿no? Lo entiendo muy bien pensando que efectivamente las formas de acercarse a la letra son plurales, ¿no? Y desde luego el resultado de Julián desde el control es óptimo, porque yo a él lo sigo y lo celebro, ¿no? Y me parece que, bueno, pero eso mirado de afuera, me parece que él, más que el control, se rige por el descontrol del control, ¿no? Entonces, esa es mi idea porque llega a lugares otros, ¿no? Que el control es muy pedagógico. El control tiene una alta cuota de pedagogía. Y lo de Julián se va para espacios menos previsibles. Su escritura avanza por un lugar que descontrola el espacio que aborda. Entonces, sí, yo pienso que efectivamente ese descontrol también es una forma de control, desde luego, pero en realidad yo tengo una escritura, claro, más descontrolada, eso no podría yo negarlo, pero lo que a mí me preocupa de las literaturas son, y que no lo tiene Julián afortunadamente, son las pedagogías de la letra, ¿no? Ahí es donde yo digo, mejor que no entrar a pedagogizar la letra y hacer de eso, digamos, una mirada unívoca, ¿no? Prefiero la pluralidad de sentidos que pueden surgir a partir de esa letra.
Julián, I wonder what do you think about this? Not only, I'm thinking about your own writing, which you talk about in terms of wanting to control things, but for a reader, is constantly surprising, I think, because it is alive and dynamic, and so the connections you make are deliberate on your part, but from our side, completely surprising and thrilling. But I wonder also how you feel when Diamela talks about her work, engaging with work like hers as a reader, as a translator, and having to make a slightly different, a bit of a shift somehow in how comfortable you are with the kind of ambiguity. I think ambiguity is the most difficult thing to translate, and so Diamela's book was incredibly difficult for this reason. But I wonder how, as someone who is writing and reading and translating on those slightly different axes, how that works for you.
Well, there are many things to say now, because you've been saying very interesting things, from Machado de Assis to this ambiguity in Diamela Eltit. I was reading your book just before coming here, and what you were saying about ambiguities in Diamela, and I was finding it very interesting and very precise too. Indeed, this was a problem while translating Diamela, because, well, words mean more than one thing in many places, and they come again and again and again, and you have to translate it and accommodate it in the best way possible, the best possible way. So it's something that becomes a problem in translating, but it's something that is a problem while writing too. You were talking about this story from Machado de Assis, and this idea, which is very beautiful, that a noun and an adjective were looking for each other and taking long and long to find each other. But then what I doubt in this story is that there are indeed adjectives that go perfectly with nouns. They never go perfectly. They are adaptations. They are trying to meet one another. They are trying to communicate something in a way that will always be imperfect. So this is why I believe I'm attempting to get the control of the process, even though I know that I won't have any control, as Diamela said really well. It becomes something else. It produces a very different reception, a very different read, another imagination transforms it into something very different from what you conceived. And maybe this is why I try to control it a lot. And maybe this is why this is beautiful. It's a beautiful process. Maybe this is why it's worth it, because you can't control it, and it becomes something else for you and for anyone that's reading. I think what I try to do is to give meaning and sense and a sort of reason, phonetical reason for every word that I put in the page. So it must say the most precisely that I can what I want to communicate, and it must sound well, because sometimes I just refuse to use a word that it's precise in its meaning but not in its form. So it's something that it's quite complex, and maybe at some points a novel may look like or seem to be, for the writer at least, poetry or music. And there's a reason why this happens. I think it gets better when this happens. And well, in the end, it becomes less and less controlled. It's something like this paradox that Diamela mentioned. And this paradox becomes even worse if you are a translator and you know it's becoming something else, a different work that will never be entirely loyal to its original.
I like
About this you can talk about more. Yeah.
I like the idea what you said at the beginning, Julián, about that much of the story, and of course there isn't a perfect match between a noun and an adjective, and it's a process of sort of accommodation somehow, finding this accommodation. And what happens in the story, for people who don't know it, is the noun and the adjective do find each other. I can spoil the story there, but he says, the narrator says, of course, because words all have genders and words can fall in love with each other, and sometimes they get married, and that is what we call style. It's what you get when you have not a perfect but a sort of accommodated relationship between this noun and this adjective or this phrase and this cadence somehow. I want to talk a little bit. I want to talk a bit about. I have so many things I want to talk about, but we don't have an infinite amount of time. But I want to ask about politics a little bit, and these books in particular. For people who don't know the books yet, Diamela's one, Never Did the Fire, is a book about two former militants and what is left of their life, what is left of their belief, what is left of their relationships after the struggle is over. Julián's book is also sort of engaged politically as the previous one is. The previous one was about it's called Resistance, about resistance. This one is about occupation in many senses, people occupying property, fetuses occupying mothers, people's stories occupying other people's stories. And I'm very curious to know how, as people who are engaged with politics, are active, maybe activist, what's the relationship of the writing and the political belief and activism and thought? What is this relationship? Diamela, I said that, this is a book about militants and about activists and about politics. Is the book also part of your political?
Bueno, yo como ciudadana, desde luego tengo una posición política que me reconozco a pesar de la crisis que tienen las terminologías hoy de izquierda, pensando, digamos, en dónde se ponía el pueblo, a qué lado se ponía el pueblo, ¿no es cierto?, en la antigua Roma, ¿no? Entonces yo me pongo a la izquierda. Me resulta un lugar más cómodo, porque sí me interesan de sobremanera las comunidades, ¿no? Para mí son fundamentales construir comunidades literarias, en fin, comunidades de estudiantes, en todo sentido. Efectivamente la novela está centrada en los militantes, ¿no? Los antiguos militantes. Para mí fue emotivo construirla, porque yo nunca he militado. Nunca he militado en un partido político, nunca milité en un partido político. Siempre estuve en la izquierda, siempre trabajé, especialmente durante la dictadura, en colectivos, en lugares donde podíamos incidir, ¿no? De manera sistemática. Pero por otro lado, en otro registro, en otro, creo que la gran política que podemos hacer los escritores y escritoras es ampliar las políticas literarias, intervenir en las políticas literarias y ampliar sus bordes, ¿no? Y en ese sentido desafiar de una u otra manera al mercado como rector de las escrituras, ¿no? Porque el mercado de pronto, y a veces editoriales muy poderosas, transnacionales, no es que publiquen libros, sino que los escriben. Estoy hablando como en una metáfora, ¿no? Escriben los libros. Entonces, pienso que la gran tarea que a mí me ha interesado mucho es cómo ampliar esos bordes, llegar a un lugar de más extensión, ¿no? Y romper un poco esa categoría centrista que me parece que es no solo es reproducida por las hegemonías, ¿no? Son las hegemonías las que dictaminan qué se lee, cómo se lee y a quién se lee, que está bien, eso yo no objeto, siempre ha sido en parte así, está bien, no estoy en una batalla contra eso, pero sí me interesa, digamos, producir políticamente una tensión, ¿no? Escritural, literaria, adentro del escrito. Pero claro, en otro registro seguramente hay una gran conexión entre mi personal posición política y la escritura, solo que mi personal posición política no me sirve tanto cuando tengo que escribir un texto porque se cruzan una serie de hilos que no había contemplado, ¿no? Que tienen que ver con el habla de mi bisabuela, de mi abuela, en fin, de cuestiones que he visto, otras que no he visto, ni veré. Entonces, sí me pareció, me junto mucho con personas de mi generación, muchas de ellas militantes, fueron militantes, y noto una cierta añoranza de ese tiempo. Una vez que los tiempos cambiaron, esos militantes quedaron, en el caso chileno, muy relacionados con los 3 años de la Unidad Popular. Hay una cierta melancolía, un pensar que ahí hubo vida, y en otro registro más fino y más elusivo, que ahí se acabó la vida, ¿no? Esa vida poderosa. Y eso fue para mí muy importante pensarlo, ¿no? Por supuesto los pensé en otra dirección, pero veía a mis amigos en esa política de la militancia y del abandono de esa militancia y el duelo y realmente la euforia cuando se unen, se juntan para recordar esa militancia. Entonces yo lo llevé para otro lado, pero me sonaba eso, ¿no? Me sonaba ese paraíso perdido, ¿no? Y que yo, por supuesto, viví ese tiempo, conocí a los militantes, sé más o menos cómo era su organización psíquica, política y psíquica, entonces me atreví a entrar a un espacio que yo misma no habité, como fue el espacio de la militancia, pero que siempre encontré, porque donde iba, pues, estaban mis militantes amigos y sus hablas, ¿no? Entonces, considero que sí, es fundamental atreverse con una política literaria, atreverse a quebrar, digamos, el pacto centrista, ¿no? ¿Por qué no? ¿Por qué no? No pierdes nada. Lo peor que puede pasar es que no quiebres nada y sea una fantasía literaria.
I love the idea, though, that what you do with form, with aesthetic, with structure, all of those things can be political subversion somehow. Julián, the thing that Diamela was just saying about having these other people whose experiences she didn't have, but she was trying to find a way of making them the center of this book. One of the things that is very important, one of the questions that's very important in occupation is how you tell other people's stories, and that, it seems to me, is a deeply political question right from the beginning, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. What Diamela was saying is very interesting to me because, well, she talks about this idea of this, as she said, añoranza of that moment. How would we translate that into English? Like people that miss the past and feel they would like to go back to that moment in history. And I was thinking that, well, I never lived anything like that, but in a way I lived it indirectly through my parents, through my father and my mother, because they were militants, and I was, while I was writing Resistance, wondering what could be our present militancy. So how could we react politically as they did in the past, and try to think our problems in the same way or in a different way, but either way, in a manner that would signify, that would be meaningful, that would interfere and change something, if possible. So I was, maybe resistance and occupation are literary ways of responding to that question, to that quest. What could be a political intervention or a political act in the present? So occupying and resisting is this common saying that is present in many places throughout the world, and is maybe the most effective way of thinking in political intervention at this point. And if we have to think in this other part of the question, which is this literary politics or something like that, as Diamela was saying, I think the main question is this one that you brought, Danny, because how can we tell other people's stories? How can we get closer to others through literature? How can we get closer to authority? Because I don't want, well, I write a lot about myself. I write autofiction, but I don't want my literature to be confined into this one scenery in which we see how a middle class writer is dealing with his own problems. I want it to be broader than that. I want it to be something different. I tried from one novel to the other, even before Resistance, to expand myself to other places. So maybe in concentric circles, get farther away from myself. And this brought me to this question in occupation. How can I tell the stories of others? How can I tell the stories I hear in this occupied building in São Paulo, in this squad? So it's something that I think there's some sort of subtlety here, because literature has been doing this for centuries, trying to tell other people's stories. But especially in our tradition here in Latin America, there's a way of colonizing our characters. Many times we get into this other with a capital O, this other, and how can I say this? And we use this character to our own end, to our own need. And I wanted to do something subtly different here, that would be letting these voices of others occupying my own writing. So it's not occupying their words or their world, but letting their voices occupy my stories. So I needed to get to hear them. I needed to be there. I needed to find these real stories that would be part of the book, and maybe like doing that, it would get a different meaning, other than different from the one we had during a century.
In a way, it's similar. In one way, it's similar to what Diamela was saying about you're finding a sort of a literary equivalent to the answer to the question. What does the answer to this question look like in literature rather than in social interaction or whatever it may be?
Yeah, well, the thing is, it comes side by side with dealing with the society that we have now. It's something that this I wouldn't have written Occupation if it weren't for the authoritarian thought that came back so strongly in Brazil this last years. So it's a kind of intervention through literature. It must be. I felt that in this moment, at this horror times, I couldn't still be writing about my own thoughts and problems. I could go back to that. I don't find it something that we should despise. It's something that has done in many contexts the meaningful and profound literature. But it's something that we need to transform at this point, in this moment. It's that maybe invites us to write a more militant literature.
It's curious, though, I suppose. If you talk about, I mean, both of you, about writing books that are in maybe particular moments or particular contexts that are about now, that are about the politics of now, books that are urgent in one sense. But I'm always interested in how those books that are so much about kind of that have the impulse of a moment, what it is that keeps them alive 15 years later, 50 years later. And I'm thinking particularly about Diamela's book, which in fact was published in Spanish in 2007, I think, 15 years ago, and was written in a moment, and was written with urgency, and was written with that flow that you described. But I wondered, Diamela, now looking at a book that is 15 years old, because translation puts a distance in language between books. Translation also sometimes puts a distance in time between books. And there is 15 years difference between these two books. What does it feel like to be dragged back to
Bueno,
2007?
Bueno, efectivamente han pasado varios años desde la publicación a esta traducción, ¿no? Es estimulante. En otro registro, otro, no tan lineal. Yo pienso que el tiempo es una convención, ¿no? Que hay la ficción del tiempo. Entonces, en otro registro, en otro, pienso que el libro salió ayer y se tradujo hoy, ¿no? Y estoy muy contenta que haya encontrado una interlocución, pero también sé muy bien, y lo sé por Julián y por ti, que en realidad traducir es reescribir, ¿no? No es exactamente mi libro, sino también tengo que pensar en comunidades, ¿no? En el libro mío y de Daniel, y en el libro mío y de Julián, porque efectivamente ellos ingresan a pensar ese libro, a activarlo, actuarlo e intervenirlo con sus propios saberes, ¿no? Por otro lado, sigo pensando que literariamente, más allá de el escenario del tiempo. Fue muy desafiante, interesante mantener una novela con una pareja arriba de una cama, ¿no? Sin sexualidad. No hay ahí un momento, digamos, de distensión de esa cama, sino esa cama, lo que tiene esa cama es memoria, ¿no? La cama como sede de memoria. Entonces, para mí es muy bonito ver que el libro, digamos, viajó. Yo sé que le debo mucho a Julián. Julián nos conocemos por mail hace muchos años. Y yo sé que él ha sido generoso conmigo. Él ha sido generoso. Y yo lo agradezco mucho y lo reconozco mucho porque también Julián es habitante del mundo brasileño. Hoy día vive una crisis no menor y también del mundo argentino, ¿no? Yo también vivo un mundo, nosotros estamos viviendo un mundo nuevo, tuvimos elecciones recientemente con un horror pánico de que Brasil se presentara en Chile a través de la extrema derecha, porque sí hemos seguido mucho la conducta muy estrambótica del presidente de Brasil, ¿no? Y estuvimos al borde con un interlocutor del presidente, de ese presidente, que fuese, ¿no es cierto?, un gran pinochetista el que nos gobernara. Pero estamos en este momento nuevo, con jóvenes, con las problemáticas del siglo XXI, que son género, ambiente, medio ambiente, ¿no es cierto?, animalismo. Es decir, están todas esos temas que están, digamos, ingresando en nuestras realidades de manera mucho más intensa que en otros momentos, ¿no? Hoy día los jóvenes sí buscan mejores condiciones para el habitar, las regiones tienen sus propios temas y problemáticas que los logran poner en evidencia entre el resto del país, y tenemos un presidente muy joven. Tal vez es el movimiento más joven que logró consolidarse en la historia de Chile. Muy rápidamente consiguieron diputados, senadores y la presidencia. Desde luego será una cuestión compleja, muy compleja, pero hay un punto de partida. Hay una constitución en curso, será muy complejo aprobarla porque hay un plebiscito de salida. Ojalá que no nos pase lo de Colombia y que la constitución no se apruebe y sigamos con la constitución de Pinochet. Pero en definitiva, efectivamente estamos viviendo un momento interesante y en mi caso particular no transito con lo inmediato. O sea, pienso que hay que esperar y esperar, porque escribir sobre el COVID o sobre el confinamiento, eso requiere, ¿cómo entras tú? Siempre tienes que entrar por los lados con mucho cuidado, ¿no? Hay que ser muy, muy cuidadoso con prácticas literarias de apropiación, ¿no? Sino más bien entrar por los costados y ver, yo soy más micro que macro, ¿no? Y me gusta esa posición menos centrista. Entonces, estoy muy contenta verdaderamente con la publicación, porque otro tema es que el libro viajo solo, porque yo verdaderamente no soy buena para agencia, no hago agencia porque estoy preocupada, al igual que Julián, por el libro. ¿Qué pasa con el libro que estoy escribiendo? Que es el primero siempre que escribo. Entonces, no, se dan solo, los libros se van. Y es bonito reencontrarme con los libros. Un libro que se fue vuelve. Entonces, no digo que un hijo pródigo, pero digo que un libro pródigo, ¿no? Entonces, muy interesante.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask Julián one last quick thing because we're almost to the end of our hour. But I was thinking when Diamela was talking about the first of all the precise political moment they're in Chile, but also wanting to have some distance from that at the point of writing. One thing that I was just thinking about occupation is because you have these other voices of the people who are occupying this building, there is a very sort of international perspective as well as the very domestic perspective. And one of the things that this allows you to do is bring in Syria and bring in Haiti and bring in various other things. And I don't even really have a question about it, I suppose, except to know wanting to know what you think. This idea of somehow using this form, using the structure that you've created to be able to position the story in a kind of global context, because it is, in a way that Diamela's book, it doesn't specifically say that it's Chile, it doesn't specifically say that it's a certain precise year or a precise moment. We know in occupation, we know it's São Paulo, we know it's a very specific time, but at the same time, it's positioned in this really big, there's a really big canvas that we're aware of, I think, when we're reading this book.
Well, I think that one phenomenon that is very evident in our times is that oppression has become something wider than only from one country. So we see in many places the extreme right movements gaining space and strength and becoming something oppressive to many people in the world. I see Bolsonaro here in Brazil as part of this movement really clearly, and we could think that he was fabricated by people that were outside of Brazil, not only, of course, but partly, yes. So it's something that I felt that if oppression has become something international that trespasses oceans and borders, maybe resistance could be that too, or more precisely, it is something that transcends oceans and borders. We see this sort of resistance being transmitted from one place to the other. We saw this in the Arab Spring. We see that in occupying Wall Street, that people were mobilized by watching that, by seeing that. The protest that we saw in the United States after George Floyd's death was something that greatly resonated here in Brazil too, and we see things quite similar at this moment, or trying to be similar to that movement. I think this was what I was trying to write, something that could be part of this same struggle, not only, well, we see an example of someone else's struggle, but it's part of the same movement of occupying and resisting. But there's something else. Okay.
And also, sorry to interrupt, but seeing each other's, I mean, I think there's also something which we know that literature, partly through translation, but not only through translation, has the possibility to be in many places simultaneously. We are having a conversation now in two hemispheres and 3 countries, and literature is the sort of the locus of that. And
this is something that I wanted to comment, indeed, because what Diamela was saying that I was generous having a book here in Brazil or there, it was not generosity at all. It was part of literary politics. Precisely that. I read Diamela. I wanted her to be present everywhere, that everyone should read these books that are very provocative in a formal way, and also in its content. And I felt that we needed to read more of this. And this is something that becomes also international, that transcends borders, that literature could be something transmissive, that we read here and start writing another type of literature after reading a different author. So it's something I really believe that having read Diamela, and I read her more than 20 years ago, was something that marked me as a writer, that changed me as a writer. I think I write differently after reading her, as I write differently after reading many other authors. So it's something that it's part of our work to do. Not only we write, but we try to put what we like in other places, and to be part of this broad conversation, as you said, Danny.
Thank you. Well, that's a lovely place to end. We are, I'm afraid, at the end of our hour. I'm going to ask Carolina Orloff in just a moment to say a couple of words. She's the publisher of these lovely books. I will encourage anyone watching this, if you have not yet got copies of Never to the Fire by Diamela Eltit, which comes out on the 5th of April. So you probably won't have this one yet, but you can pre-order it. Julián Fuks' Occupation, which is already out, and you can get that now. I urge you very strongly to get hold of copies of these books and read them. You will be sent an online evaluation form about this event. Please do fill it in. Please, if you are in a position to donate to the festival to help them do the brilliant work they do, that would be very kind. If you could do that, you should go to paisleybookfest.com/support. Word of mouth is incredibly important, so do please tell people about this event and about other things you see at this festival. Follow them at Book Paisley on Twitter, at Paisley Book Fest on Instagram, using the hashtag PBF2022 if you want to tag them. And check out the festival bookshop at bookshop.org, which supports independent bookshops from around the UK. There are, of course, plenty of other brilliant events at Paisley Book Festival for you to watch, so I hope you will find many other things, and I hope you enjoyed this one. Thank you to Julián. Thank you to Diamela. It's a great pleasure to talk to you. I should say that despite having lived in Diamela's head for several months last year, this is the first conversation we've had, actually, so it's a great pleasure to talk to you in real life. And I'm just going to ask Carolina Caro, who's the publisher of all of these books, just to say a couple of last words before we wrap up for today.
Well, thanks to all of you for being here, and thanks to the Paisley Book Festival. I've been in the backstage here, taking down and crying quietly, because this has been so moving for me. And I won't keep you long because I know we're running out of time, but within the framework of this event, I was thinking, which is called Stories of Resistance, and picking on what Diamela was saying about the belief in communities and widening borders. I'm just very grateful. I'm very proud to have brought the three of you together, because if I remember correctly, and Danny, if I'm wrong, tell me later, it was you, Danny, who first drew your attention, or my attention, to Julián's work, and then Julián, just before he left, having come to the Edinburgh Book Festival, he was just getting on the taxi and he said, you've got to publish Diamela. And it's just very refreshing and very hopeful for me to believe in communities, because what Danny said to me was like, of course. And when Julián said to me, you got to publish Diamela, of course, this trust in minds that are working towards a same kind of objective. I hope I'm making sense, which is back to the broadening of borders, and back to believing in an idea of community, and of being interested and curious about different worlds, different ways of thinking, which can only be enriching. So it's just been very moving to bring all these voices together, and know that we're doing something right in this messed up world, and that literature is still extremely vital. So I'm going to shut up there and say thank you very much, and I hope people watching there have learned as much as I have today, because it's been amazing. So thank you. Gracias. Obrigada.
Thank you.